The morning sun cast long shadows across the corridors of Buckingham Palace as Captain James Mitchell walked his usual rounds. He had been a royal guard for 15 years and nothing surprised him anymore. Or so he thought. As he approached the Queen Consort's private chambers, something felt different. The usual sounds of morning preparation were absent, replaced by an eerie silence that made his skin crawl. Camilla had been preparing for weeks for a special ceremony where she would wear her coronation robe for the first time since becoming Queen Consort. The entire palace staff knew how important this day was. The robe, worth millions and steeped in centuries of tradition, represented more than just fabric and jewels. It was a symbol of the monarchy itself. But when James knocked on the door to announce the morning briefing, no answer came. He knocked again, harder this time. Still nothing. Protocol demanded that he never enter the royal chambers without permission, but something in his gut told him this was different. The silence wasn't the peaceful quiet of sleep. It was the unsettling stillness of absence. He called for backup through his radio, his voice steady despite the growing concern in his chest. Within minutes, 2 other guards arrived, along with the head of palace security. They had tried calling Camilla's personal phone, but it went straight to voicemail. Her lady-in-waiting hadn't seen her since the evening before when she had retired early, claiming she needed rest before the big day. The head of security made the decision that would change everything. They would enter the chambers to ensure the Queen Consort's safety. James felt his heart racing as they used the master key. The door creaked open to reveal an immaculately clean sitting room, but no sign of Camilla anywhere. They searched every corner of the chambers, calling her name softly. The bedroom was empty, the bed unslept in. The bathroom showed no signs of recent use. It was as if she had simply vanished into thin air. But the most puzzling discovery was yet to come. James noticed that the door to Camilla's private closet, a room-sized space that housed her most precious garments, was slightly ajar. This was unusual because that door was always kept locked. The Queen Consort was particular about her clothing, especially the pieces with historical significance. She personally held the only key, and palace staff were strictly forbidden from entering without her explicit permission. The head of security approached the closet door with caution. Through the small gap, they could see that something was wrong. Clothes were scattered on the floor, hangers lay broken, and there were signs of a struggle. It looked like someone had been searching frantically for something specific. As they prepared to open the closet door fully, James couldn't shake the feeling that they were about to uncover something that would rock the very foundations of the royal family. The missing Queen Consort was just the beginning of a mystery that would challenge everything they thought they knew about palace security and royal protocol. The silence in the room was broken only by the sound of their breathing and the distant chiming of Big Ben. Whatever had happened here, it had occurred under their watch in one of the most secure buildings in Britain. The implications were staggering, and James knew that this morning would be remembered as the day everything changed at Buckingham Palace. The head of security, Commander Sarah Walsh, made the call that protocol demanded in such circumstances. With 3 guards as witnesses, she pushed open the closet door completely. What they saw inside made them all take a step back in shock. The usually pristine space looked like a tornado had swept through it. Expensive gowns lay crumpled on the marble floor, their delicate fabrics wrinkled, and some even torn. Jewelry boxes had been overturned, their contents scattered like fallen stars across the carpet. Shoes were thrown in every direction and hat boxes had been ripped open and emptied. But most disturbing of all, the special display case that should have held Camilla's coronation robe stood completely empty. James felt his mouth go dry as he stared at the vacant case. The coronation robe wasn't just any piece of clothing. It was a masterpiece that had taken artisans 2 years to create, using techniques passed down through generations. The robe was embroidered with real gold thread and adorned with precious stones, including sapphires that had once belonged to Queen Victoria herself. Commander Walsh immediately secured the scene and called for the palace's top investigators. Within the hour, the closet was crawling with forensic experts, photographers, and security specialists. They dusted for fingerprints, collected fabric samples, and documented every detail of the chaos. Dr. Elizabeth Harper, the palace's chief historian and keeper of royal garments, arrived looking pale and shaken. She had personally overseen the creation of the coronation robe and knew every stitch, every bead, every detail of its construction. When she saw the empty case, tears filled her eyes. She explained to the investigation team just how irreplaceable the robe was. Beyond its monetary value of several £1,000,000, it contained historical elements that could never be recreated. Some of the pearls sewn into the fabric had been worn by Queen Elizabeth I. The central brooch was a family heirloom dating back 4 centuries. The silk itself had been specially woven using traditional methods that few people in the world still knew how to perform. As the investigation continued, they discovered something even more puzzling. Hidden behind a fallen evening gown, they found Camillas' personal diary, open to an entry from 3 days earlier. In her own handwriting, she had written about strange phone calls she had been receiving. Someone had been asking detailed questions about her schedule, her security arrangements, and specifically about the coronation robe. The diary entry revealed that Camilla had been increasingly worried about these calls. She had reported them to security, but they had traced the calls to untraceable phones. The caller had an accent she couldn't place and seemed to know intimate details about the royal family's private activities. What scared her most was that the caller had mentioned the exact location where the robe was kept, information that very few people possessed. Commander Walsh read the diary entry aloud to the team, her voice growing more concerned with each word. It was becoming clear that this wasn't a random theft or a crime of opportunity. Someone had planned this carefully, studying Camilla's routines and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The most chilling part of the diary entry was the final line. "I feel like I'm being watched, even here in the palace. I've asked them to increase security around my chambers, but I can't shake the feeling that someone is waiting for something. God help me, I think they're after the robe." As the implications of the diary entry sank in, James realized they weren't just dealing with a missing queen consort and a stolen garment. They were facing something much more sinister, a carefully orchestrated plan that had been weeks or even months in the making. The investigation team worked through the day, but as evening approached, they had more questions than answers. James found himself assigned to review hours of security footage from the palace's extensive camera system. What he discovered in the recordings made his blood run cold. At exactly 2:47 a.m., the cameras in the corridor outside Camilla's chambers went dark for precisely 11 minutes. During those 11 minutes, there was no visual record of what happened. When the cameras came back online, everything appeared normal. No signs of struggle, no evidence of intruders, nothing out of place. James called Commander Walsh immediately. This wasn't a technical malfunction. Someone with advanced knowledge of the palace's security system had deliberately disabled the cameras. The timing was too precise, too surgical to be anything but professional work. Whoever had done this knew exactly how the system operated and had the skills to manipulate it without triggering any alarms. The technical team that maintained the security system was called in for emergency questioning. Tom Bradley, the head technician, looked genuinely puzzled as he examined the footage logs. He explained that disabling cameras like this would require access to the main security hub, which was located 3 floors below ground level and protected by multiple layers of security. As Tom dug deeper into the system logs, he made a disturbing discovery. Someone had accessed the security hub at 2:30 a.m. using legitimate credentials. The access card belonged to Marcus Chen, a trusted security technician who had worked at the palace for 8 years. But according to the staff schedule, Marcus wasn't supposed to be working that night. Commander Walsh immediately ordered a search for Marcus, but what they found only deepened the mystery. Marcus Chen was found in his apartment, unconscious and clearly drugged. When paramedics revived him, he had no memory of the previous night. His access card was missing from his wallet, and he swore he had locked it in his bedroom drawer before going to sleep. While Marcus was being treated by medical staff, investigators searched his apartment thoroughly. They found no evidence that he was involved in the theft, but they did discover something that made everyone's skin crawl. Hidden under his mattress was a detailed floor plan of the palace, marked with Camilla's daily routine and the exact location of the coronation robe. Marcus insisted he had never seen the floor plan before. He broke down crying as he realized someone had used him as an unwitting pawn in their scheme. The drugs in his system were sophisticated, designed to cause memory loss without leaving obvious traces. Whoever had done this to him was clearly working with people who had access to military-grade substances. Dr. Rebecca Stone, the palace physician, examined Marcus and confirmed that he had been given a combination of drugs typically used by intelligence agencies. The precise dosage suggested that whoever administered them had medical training and knew exactly how to render someone unconscious, without causing permanent harm. As the pieces of the puzzle began forming a picture, James felt a chill run down his spine. This wasn't the work of common criminals or even typical art thieves. The level of planning, the sophisticated techniques, and the intimate knowledge of palace operations pointed to something much more serious. Commander Walsh gathered the core investigation team in a secure conference room. The evidence was pointing toward a professional operation, possibly involving foreign agents or international crime syndicates. The Coronation Robe wasn't just valuable as a piece of art. It was a symbol of British sovereignty that could be used for political purposes. But the biggest question remained unanswered. Where was Queen Consort Camilla? Was she a victim of kidnapping, or had something even worse happened to her? As night fell over London, James realized they were racing against time to solve a mystery that threatened to shake the very foundations of the British monarchy. As dawn broke over London, James hadn't slept for over 24 hours. The search for Camilla had expanded beyond the palace walls, with every police station in the city on high alert. But then something unexpected happened that changed everything. At 6:15 a.m., James received an urgent call from the palace's main gate. A taxi driver was there, claiming he had dropped off a confused elderly woman near Hyde Park Corner around 3:30 a.m. The woman had been wearing an expensive-looking nightgown and seemed disoriented. She had paid him with what looked like antique jewelry and asked him not to tell anyone about the ride. Commander Walsh immediately dispatched a team to interview the taxi driver, Mohammed Hassan, who had been driving nights in London for over 20 years. He described a woman who matched Camilla's description perfectly, but she had seemed like she was in some kind of trance. She kept mumbling about needing to protect the crown and finding the safe place. Mohammed said the woman had given him a small diamond brooch as payment, insisting it was all she had with her. When shown photos of Camilla, he positively identified her but expressed concern about her mental state. She had seemed confused about where she was and kept looking over her shoulder as if someone was following her. The location where Mohammed had dropped her off was significant. It was near the old underground tunnels that connected various government buildings during World War II. These tunnels had been sealed decades ago, but James knew that some entrances were still accessible to those who knew where to look. A search team was immediately deployed to comb the area around Hyde Park Corner. They used thermal imaging equipment and brought in search dogs trained to detect human scent. After 3 hours of systematic searching, they found something that made James's heart skip a beat. Hidden behind overgrown bushes near an old ventilation shaft, they discovered torn pieces of expensive silk nightgown, the same type Camilla had been wearing. The fabric was caught on thorns and appeared to have been there for several hours. More importantly, the search dogs picked up a strong scent trail leading toward one of the old tunnel entrances. The tunnel entrance was partially concealed by decades of ivy growth, but recent disturbance was evident. Someone had clearly forced their way through the vegetation, and fresh footprints in the muddy ground suggested that at least 2 people had passed this way recently. Commander Walsh made the decision to send a small team into the tunnels. James volunteered immediately despite his exhaustion. The tunnels were dark, damp, and filled with the musty smell of decades of disuse. Their flashlight beams cut through the darkness as they followed the footprints deeper underground. After what felt like hours of walking through the maze-like passages, they heard something that made them all freeze. It was the sound of a woman crying echoing off the tunnel walls. The sound was coming from somewhere ahead, and it was definitely human. Moving as quietly as possible, they followed the sound until they reached a junction where several tunnels converged. There, in a small chamber that had once served as an air raid shelter, they found her. Camilla was sitting on an old wooden crate, still wearing her torn nightgown, but she was not alone. Standing guard over her was a man in dark clothing, and spread out on a makeshift table was the missing coronation robe. The man was carefully photographing every detail of the robe with professional equipment. But the most shocking discovery was what James saw next. The man wasn't trying to steal the robe, he was documenting it. Spread around the chamber were dozens of photographs, detailed sketches, and what appeared to be scientific equipment for analyzing fabric and precious stones. As the guards positioned themselves to apprehend the man, James noticed something else that made his blood run cold. Camilla wasn't being held against her will. She was actively helping him, pointing out specific details of the robe's construction and explaining the historical significance of various elements. The reality of the situation hit James like a physical blow. This wasn't a kidnapping at all. Queen Consort Camilla was voluntarily participating in what appeared to be the systematic documentation and analysis of one of the crown's most precious artifacts. But why? And what did this mean for the monarchy itself? Commander Walsh signaled for the team to hold their positions while she tried to make sense of what they were witnessing. Camilla looked up as their flashlight beams illuminated the chamber, and instead of relief or fear, her face showed something unexpected, resignation mixed with determination. The man with her stepped protectively in front of Camilla, but he didn't reach for any weapons. Instead, he raised his hand slowly and spoke in a calm, educated voice with a slight European accent. He introduced himself as Dr. Viktor Petrov, a textile historian and expert in medieval preservation techniques. What happened next shocked James even more than finding Camilla in the tunnels. She stood up, brushed the dust from her nightgown, and spoke with the authority of someone who was completely in control of the situation. She wasn't a victim at all. She was the orchestrator of this entire operation. Camilla explained that 3 months earlier, she had received disturbing information from Dr. Harper, the palace historian. Advanced analysis of the Coronation Robe had revealed that it was deteriorating much faster than anyone had realized. The combination of age, the weight of the precious stones, and exposure to light during ceremonies was causing irreversible damage to the ancient silk. But the truly shocking revelation was what the analysis had uncovered about the robe's construction. Hidden within the layers of fabric, Dr. Petrov's examination had revealed something that could change British history forever. Sewn into the lining were documents written in code, dating back to the 17th century. Dr. Petrov had been secretly working with Camilla to decode these hidden documents. What they discovered was explosive, evidence of secret agreements between the British Crown and foreign powers that had never been made public. These documents contained information about territorial concessions, financial arrangements, and political alliances that contradicted the official historical record. Camilla had realized that if this information became public through normal channels, it could destabilize the monarchy and damage Britain's relationships with several allied nations. The documents suggested that previous monarchs had made promises and agreements that were still technically binding under international law. She had made the difficult decision to secretly preserve and document the robe before its deterioration made the hidden documents unreadable forever. But she couldn't do this within the palace, where every action was monitored and recorded. She needed a secure location where Dr. Petrov could work without interference from palace officials or government oversight. The kidnapping had been an elaborate cover story to buy them time. Using her knowledge of palace security and her friendship with Marcus Chen, she had arranged for the cameras to be disabled during a narrow window of opportunity. Marcus had been drugged to protect him from being blamed for the security breach. Camilla had insisted that no innocent person should suffer for her decisions. James found himself in an impossible position. Technically, Camilla had committed theft by removing the robe from the palace. But she was also the queen consort, and her motivations were clearly intended to protect the monarchy rather than harm it. Commander Walsh looked equally conflicted as she processed the implications of what they had discovered. Dr. Petrov showed them his work, hundreds of high-resolution photographs, detailed chemical analyses of the fabric and inks, and partial translations of the coded documents. His equipment was more sophisticated than anything the palace owned, and his expertise was clearly genuine. But the most compelling evidence was the physical condition of the robe itself. Even to James's untrained eye, it was obvious that the ancient fabric was fragile beyond repair. In several places, the silk was literally falling apart, and some of the coded writing was already becoming illegible. Camilla's voice carried the weight of someone who had made an impossible choice between duty to protocol and duty to history. She had known that removing the robe would cause a crisis, but she also knew that waiting for official approval would mean losing crucial historical evidence forever. As the team stood in the underground chamber, surrounded by centuries of hidden history, James realized they were facing a decision that would affect not just their careers, but potentially the future of the British monarchy itself. The question was no longer about finding a missing queen consort. It was about deciding what to do with secrets that some people would kill to protect. Commander Walsh faced the most difficult decision of her career. As the head of palace security, her duty was clear: secure the robe and return it to the palace immediately. But as a servant of the crown, she also had to consider the broader implications of what Camilla had revealed. Dr. Petrov continued his explanation while carefully handling fragments of the deteriorating documents. The coded messages revealed details about secret financial arrangements with France during the Napoleonic Wars, unauthorized territorial concessions in India, and most shocking of all, evidence that certain crown jewels had been secretly sold and replaced with replicas during times of financial crisis. If these revelations became public without proper preparation, they could trigger international legal challenges to British sovereignty over territories that were granted through the secret agreements. Several countries could potentially demand reparations or territorial adjustments based on the hidden documents. James watched as Camilla showed them specific sections of the coded text that Dr. Petrov had already translated. One particularly damaging passage suggested that during World War I, the royal family had maintained secret communications with German relatives while publicly supporting the war effort. Another revealed undisclosed financial investments in American companies during the Revolutionary War. The weight of these secrets was overwhelming, but Commander Walsh knew they couldn't make these decisions in an underground tunnel. She made the call to contact the highest levels of government security. Within 2 hours, a discreet team of specialists arrived, including representatives from MI5 and senior advisors to the Prime Minister. The meeting that followed was unlike anything James had ever witnessed. Camilla, still in her torn nightgown but speaking with complete authority, presented her case to some of the most powerful people in Britain. She argued that the information needed to be preserved and studied before decisions were made about public disclosure. Dr. Petrov's expertise became crucial as government. Historians verified his translations and confirmed the authenticity of the documents. The silk fibers and ink composition matched the claimed historical periods, and the writing style was consistent with known documents from the same eras. But as the day wore on, a new complication emerged. Intelligence sources revealed that foreign agencies had been monitoring unusual activity around the palace. The mysterious phone calls that Camilla had received weren't random. They were reconnaissance attempts by parties who had somehow learned about the hidden documents. The government's top cryptographer, Dr. Sarah Mills, arrived with additional decoding equipment. Her preliminary analysis suggested that there might be even more hidden layers within the documents, codes within codes that could contain additional sensitive information. As Dr. Mills worked, James found himself guarding not just a missing robe, but potentially some of the most sensitive state secrets in British history. The underground chamber had been transformed into a makeshift laboratory, with scholars, security experts, and government officials working around the clock to understand the full scope of what had been discovered. Camilla remained at the center of the operation, her knowledge of royal history and protocol proving invaluable. She worked closely with Dr. Petrov to identify which sections of the documents required immediate attention and which could wait for more detailed analysis later. But the most significant development came when Dr. Mills discovered a pattern in the coded messages that suggested they weren't just random historical documents. They appeared to be part of a larger archive, a systematic record-keeping system that previous monarchs had used to document sensitive decisions that couldn't be included in official records. This revelation meant that there might be similar hidden documents in other royal artifacts, clothing, and ceremonial objects throughout the palace. The Coronation Robe might just be the tip of an iceberg of hidden history that could reshape understanding of British political and economic development over the past 4 centuries. As night fell on their second day in the tunnels, James realized that what had started as a search for a missing queen consort had evolved into something far more complex. They weren't just preserving a piece of clothing anymore. They were potentially uncovering a secret historical record that could change everything. 3 weeks later, James stood in the same corridor where this extraordinary journey had begun, but everything had changed. The official story released to the media was that Queen Consort Camilla had taken a brief private retreat for personal reflection, and that the coronation robe had been temporarily removed for routine conservation work. The truth was far more complex. Dr. Petrov's work had been completed under the highest levels of government security, and his findings had been classified at the highest levels. The hidden documents had revealed not just historical secrets, but a sophisticated system of record-keeping that had been used by British monarchs for over 3 centuries. Working with Dr. Mills and a team of international experts, they had discovered similar hidden documents in 17 other royal artifacts. Each piece of the puzzle revealed more about the secret history of British diplomacy, finance, and international relations. Some revelations were embarrassing, others were diplomatically sensitive, but many actually enhanced Britain's historical reputation by revealing previously unknown acts of humanitarian aid and diplomatic mediation. Camilla had been quietly celebrated within the highest circles of government for her foresight in preserving these documents. Her actions, while technically breaking protocol, had prevented the loss of irreplaceable historical evidence. The Prime Minister himself had personally thanked her for her courage in making an impossible decision. Dr. Petrov had been granted special status as a consultant to the Crown, working with British historians to develop new preservation techniques for ancient textiles containing hidden documents. His methods were now being used by museums and royal institutions around the world. Marcus Chen had been cleared of any wrongdoing and promoted to a senior position in palace security. The trauma of being unknowingly drugged had been difficult for him, but he took pride in knowing that his sacrifice had contributed to preserving British history. Commander Walsh had briefed James and the other guards on the new protocols that had been developed as a result of this incident. The palace security system had been upgraded with additional safeguards, but more importantly, new procedures were in place for handling situations where historical preservation might conflict with standard security protocols. The coronation robe itself had been carefully restored using Dr. Petrov's techniques. The hidden documents had been photographed, translated, and stored in multiple secure locations. The robe would still be worn for ceremonial occasions, but with new understanding of its historical significance beyond its symbolic value. James had been commended for his role in the investigation and offered a promotion, but he had chosen to remain in his current position. The experience had taught him that being a royal guard meant more than just following protocol. Sometimes it meant protecting history itself. As he walked his morning rounds, James reflected on how the incident had changed his perspective on his duties. The palace wasn't just a building to be protected. It was a repository of living history where every artifact, every tradition, and every ceremony carried layers of meaning that weren't always visible on the surface. The most profound change was in how the royal family approached their historical responsibilities. New programs had been established to systematically examine royal artifacts for hidden historical documents. A special team of historians, conservators, and security experts had been formed to handle similar discoveries in the future. Camilla had returned to her regular duties, but with a new role as patron of historical preservation societies. Her experience with the coronation robe had established her as a champion for protecting Britain's hidden history, and she worked closely with museums and universities to develop better methods for preserving ancient documents. The story of the missing queen consort and the lost coronation robe would never be told publicly, but it had already begun changing how Britain understood and preserved its own history. James knew that he had been part of something extraordinary, a moment when duty, courage, and historical responsibility had converged to protect secrets that future generations would need to understand their past. As Big Ben chimed the hour, James smiled to himself. Today would be a normal day at the palace, but he now knew that normal at Buckingham Palace could be more extraordinary than most people would ever imagine. The corridors he walked were filled not just with royal protocol and ceremony, but with living history that continued to evolve with each passing day.